And our final speaker, DeeAnne Gunnemann, Virginia Hall. Virginia Hall, DeeAnne Gunnemann.
Good evening, fellow Toastmasters. And maybe there's some guests as well. How does an American woman, in a time when women were expected to be a wife, a mother, and maybe a secretary, become a British espionage agent for the French resistance, all before America was even involved in World War II? And she became the #1 target of the Nazis in France during the course of her time there. And how did this woman, who, by the way, had a prosthetic leg from the knee down on her left leg from a hunting accident, and she was the one who is really credited with making it possible for D-Day to happen. And not only for D-Day to happen, but also, you know, the Hollywood pictures show that that's kind of like the big hurrah and it ends. No, there was a lot more work to be done. Today, I will cover just a few of the many ways in which Virginia Hall made a massive impact on World War II and the Allied victories before, during, and after America became involved. Where she started taking the path was, she was, of course, expected to marry wealthy, and she was engaged. But after ditching her well-to-do cheating fiance, she decided she was going to study and use her intelligence, and she went to 5 different universities, including time in France when she was in her 20s in 1926. She returned 3 years later back to America, and she studied some more languages because she wanted to be an ambassador. Well, apparently women couldn't be ambassadors either. So after 3 years of rejection and becoming a secretary, every time they would reassign her, but she was just another flavor of a secretary, that she really wanted to get involved because of her concern. She was seeing fascism spreading, and that was her #1 concern. And she could see that it was coming at France, and France had become kind of her second country, and she wanted to be there. She accepted, still with the American group, posts in various different countries. And at one point, she ended up in a train station and was chatting up with a guy. And he was so impressed with her that he gave her a contact number for the British Special Office Executives, the SOE, where they were trying, even though the French hated the British at that point, they realized that France was where they had the best chance of making a stand and stopping the spread of the Nazis and the fascism. And at first she didn't contact, but after a few more secretarial assignments, she decided she'd had about enough, and indeed was one of the first people to come over to France as a part of that group from Britain to try to start establishing networks and get eyes on the ground, because they were completely blind to what was going on. And at that point, the Nazis had rolled into part of France, which basically just crumbled without a whimper. And there were free zones. And that is how she got started. But there were times where she was the only one there. They would send in radio operators, and they were lucky if they landed without something happening to them. And the Nazis, I honestly, from all the movies I've seen, didn't realize just how advanced their technology was. When it came to radios, they had seconds to keep it safe and get it off, but you had to wait for responses. And the Nazis got so good at triangulating where radio waves were coming from, it was a real danger to have a radio. So she started setting up networks and having some success there. Initially, she came over as under her own name, not a spy name yet. as a journalist for the New York Post, and that was how she delivered the messages, was in that packet. And at the time, Germany didn't have a problem with America. America was neutral. And the French didn't particularly have a problem with them either, so she was safe. Then she found that she really felt she needed to be in Lyon, where there was a lot more of the activity going. And when she moved in, there was 20,000 refugees there, so there wasn't a room to be had. But she never let much of anything stop her. So she went to the convent. And the nuns became the first part of her real network and being able to spread information and be, these eyes and ears. Curiously, the next real boon that she had was getting introduced to one of the main area brothel madames. And she, through that group, and she would call them her tart friends, developed whole ranges of schemes because, of course, the soldiers would come in, and it didn't matter whether it was the corrupt French, which a lot of them had become because they thought they would have fame and glory later if they cozied up to the Nazis, or the Nazi soldiers. And they would do things like they had a doctor who would write notes guaranteeing that these girls were clean of STDs, but they weren't. And then they would get prescriptions for various drugs so that they could knock them out, so they could go through their pockets and look at what might be there. They would put itching powder in their underwear and all kinds of other little things that they were doing. They were even getting them addicted on heroin so that they couldn't fight anymore and would end up not being effective soldiers. Throughout the time that she was there, the real frustration was she would get a network going and people trusted her. She was charming. She was, a tall, striking woman. And she would be able to form all these connections, including with farmers and cooks and cosmeticians and so forth, that really helped to build out this network. And then they would send a man in to tell her what to do because she wasn't actually military. She didn't have a rank. And the problem with the men that they sent in was they would either sleep with the wrong woman, double agent, or so many women that the women then got in a fight and created, a big scenario and everybody, knew who was who. There were also times where even just the people coming in, they weren't always so smart. I mean, they were told, memorize your information and get rid of the note. But they would get captured with the note in their pocket of all the safe houses and the phone numbers and contacts. So it was just an ongoing battle of regenerating these networks. But Virginia was very smart. She would not turn her networks over when she found one of these men coming in that would brag about their accomplishments and their wins and so forth when they were doing nothing. So she was very careful to try to keep that separated off. There came a point where her cover was literally blown to the point of no return. There was a double agent who had managed to, she was cautious about him, but he just knew so much and he knew all the right lingo and all the right things. And he was pretending to be a priest. And he ended up unraveling and, a lot of people getting thrown in jail and so forth. So the SOE pulled her back and they would not allow her to go back. And then in 1944, Roosevelt started up the OSS, the Office of Special Services. And so she was able to get back into France with them, even though at the point she left, I need to backtrack a second here. When she realized that her cover was blown to the point that she had to escape immediately, it was in the winter. She has a prosthetic leg and she had to climb on foot over the Pyrenees Mountains. She got to the other side, briefly was captured, but escaped, and then got into these other things. So she'd been out of France for a while. So one of the things the OSS helped her with was disguises. And so between makeup and various things, to put on her face, she made herself look like an old woman. They filed her teeth to make her look totally different. And she relearned because Klaus Barbie was after her. He had put out warnings and pictures of her the morning after she managed to start her escape. And so she taught herself to just shuffle rather than limp, because that was one of the traits that Klaus Barbie knew her as. And he was known as the Butcher of Lyon. He was again, I've seen and read different books and movies. But some of the details in Sonia Purnell's book go to really horrific of what he would do, especially if he caught a woman. And she was the one he was after. She restarted networks. He had much bigger, better thought out. She even had prison guards, the town people, even though they were being paid to turn in everybody. Again, cosmeticians, the prostitutes. She would go in and pretend to be a cook, and she would literally, I mean, she had so many skills, she could keep that kind of cover. And they even had police and German soldiers who were helping them with the resistance. D-Day came along because they finally had enough network and the information going in. And then their job became sabotage. Earlier, they couldn't do much sabotage because if they sabotaged something, then the Nazis would just go and kill so many people that it wasn't worth whatever little thing they'd done. But she was in charge of not only the drops of supplies and such and money coming in, but blowing up tunnels, trains, stopping food, poisoning food, really just hitting them on every level. And she figured out where they were going to go to move their headquarters because the Nazis had so much heat on them. And her group got there first and basically just kind of ruined their plan. She never did this for any kind of glory. She would have loved to have had the authority to actually meet somebody and get the credit for it. But she had many different awards that they at some point tried to give her. If she accepted them at all, it was only in private. And that was just not her driving goal. Unfortunately, so many of the people she worked with, that was their only goal, was what the glory was. She focused on the results and not what was going to come out of it later. After the fact, there were certainly those in power that noted that D-Day would not have happened without her efforts. And she was also instrumental in the complete defeat of the Germans in France because she did not leave after that. When she came back, she was with the CIA. It would be great if they'd gotten smarter and realized all of her accomplishments, but instead she pretty much became a secretary again. She was repeatedly insulted. There was at one point where they had her supervisor, man, was 4 levels below where she was at in the organization, but that was her supervisor. And then to add ultimate insult to injury, the US paid Klaus Barbie, the butcher of Lyon, to come over to help teach them what to look for in communism, because that was what they were more concerned about at the time, in the same agency that she was working in. And later they realized she is actually the case that they use to teach about sexual harassment in the CIA at this point. She has a building named after her with the CIA, and posthumously, she also received awards from the agency as well. To learn more about Virginia's exploits and details about World War II that you might not know, I would definitely recommend reading Sonia Purnell, and that's Purnell book, A Woman of No Importance.